Good morning, church. We're in John chapter 12 today. We just finished up chapter 11 where Jesus had raised his friend Lazarus to life again after he had been dead in the grave for 4 days. And the news of that event had echoed throughout all of Jerusalem. Everybody heard that story and was curious about it. And they had a variety of responses to it. The crowds were elated to think about the Messiah coming. And when Jesus comes into town, they are there with palm branches shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." And that proclamation is echoed visually because Jesus is riding in on a young donkey colt. And while that may not mean much to us, the Jews knew what that meant. And John quotes from the Old Testament to affirm that when he says, "See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." So everything about this entry into Jerusalem just echoed the refrain that Jesus is the promised Messiah that Israel has been looking forward to. But among leadership, they didn't have that kind of response. John says that even though Jesus performed all these miraculous signs, those in leadership refused to believe in him. And he quotes some Old Testament passages that affirms that that was going to be the case, prophesied from the Old Testament. Even those in leadership who did believe in Jesus, John says they kept their mouths shut for fear that they would be expelled from the synagogues. So even those who did believe, weren't willing to speak out in affirmation of that for fear of the price they would have to pay personally. But we have one of the greatest stories in here is the story of Jesus with Mary and Martha. And Mary comes before Jesus here, and she has a bottle of fragrance, pure nard, they say. And when Jesus is there, she pours it on his feet, and she wipes his feet with her hair. Such a wonderful symbolic act of sacrifice, of self-humiliation in honor of Jesus. But Jesus brings up another point here because Judas begins to question whether that was a wise thing to do, to take such an expensive perfume and use it in this way. And Jesus says to the disciples, "Mary has done this because she is preparing me for my burial." Jesus had spoken about this from time to time in the past. The disciples probably weren't listening or weren't thinking in that vein. But now, more blatantly than ever, Jesus is making the claim. He is informing the disciples that ahead for him was going to be his execution and his death. In fact, a little bit later on in this, as he's talking to Philip and some other disciples, he says this, "Unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." You know, you and I are the seed of that sacrifice. Had Jesus refused to go to the cross, had he rejected God's plan and chose otherwise, and I have no reason to believe that Jesus could not have done that, although he was fully obedient to his Father. But had he not have done that, you and I would have had no hope. The rest of humanity would have rested with the weight of our sin on us, and only us to pay the penalty for that sin. So Jesus sacrifices himself. He dies on the cross so that through that sacrifice, as a seed that is buried in the soil, many, many other offshoots arise. And we are blessed multiple times because of that. I'd love your comments from this chapter. Read through it and share your thoughts on Facebook. Have a great day.